The real cure for the current degeneration of Masonry, and probably the only one, would be anything else. It would be, supposedly, that the thing is still possible, to change the mentality of the Masons, or at least of those who are able to understand their own initiation, but to whom, it must be said, the opportunity has not been given so far. Their number would matter little elsewhere, because, in the presence of serious and truly initiated work, the unqualified elements would soon eliminate themselves, and with them would disappear, by force itself, things. These agents of counter-initiation, to the role of which we have allocated to in the passage of Theosophism quoted at the end of the article, because nothing could take into account their action anymore. To operate a realignment of Masonry in the traditional sense, it is not about aiming for the moon, whatever Interbidus says, or building in the clouds. It is just about using the possibilities at hand, as small as they may be. To begin with, but, at a time like ours, who will dare to undertake such a work? Normally, all those who are so qualified should, by this, have the opportunity to obtain initiation. If not, in fact, this applies only to the present state of the Western world, and in this regard, the disappearance of the self-conscious elite and the absence of initiation organizations adequate to receive it appear as two closely linked facts between them, somehow correlative, without even perhaps asking which could have been a consequence of the other. But, on the other hand, it is obvious that initiative organizations, which would really and fully be what they should be, and not simply more or less degenerated remains of what once was, could only be formed if they found possessed elements. Not only the necessary initial aptitude as a precondition, but also the effective arrangements determined by the consciousness of this ability, because it is up to them that it belongs first of all to aspire, the initiation. And it would be to reverse the reports that think that it must come to them independently of this aspiration, which is like a first manifestation of the essentially active attitude required by everything that is truly initiative. Therefore, the reconstruction of the elite, we mean the elite aware of its initial possibilities, although they can only be latent and undeveloped possibilities until regular traditional reattachment is not achieved. Here is the primary condition on which everything else depends. As well as the presence of pre-prepared materials is essential to the construction of a building, although these materials can obviously not fulfill their purpose until they have found their place in the building itself. Assuming the initiation, as an attachment to a traditional chain, actually achieved by those who belong to the elite, it will still remain to be considered, for each of them, the possibility of going further or less further, that is, to first move from virtual initiation to effective initiation. Then to reach into it possession of any degree more or less higher, depending on the extent of its own particular possibilities. So, for the transition from one degree to another, it will be necessary to consider what one might call an elite within the elite itself. 1. And this is how some may have talked about the elite of the elite. 2. In other words, one can consider successive elections, and increasingly restrictive in terms of the number of individuals they concern, always operating from the top, and following the same principle, and corresponding to the different degrees of the initial hierarchy. 3. Thus, from close to close, one can go all the way to the supreme election, the one that refers to the adeptat, that is, the fulfillment of the ultimate goal of any initiation, and therefore, the chosen in the fullest sense of the word, the one that could be called the perfect chosen, will be the one who will finally achieve the realization of the supreme identity. 4. 1. There was still a fairly clear reference to this in 18th century Masonry, when it was talking about the construction of a system of high ranks inside an ordinary lodge. 2. Of course, this is not about different elites, but many degrees in one and the same elite. 3. It is in this assumption that the word elected can be found, for example, in the designation of certain higher ranks of various Masonic rites, which, by the way, does not mean that we have always kept the real awareness of its meaning and all that it entails truly. 4. In the Islamic tradition, El-Mustafa, the Chosen One, is one of the Prophet's names. When this word is thus used, for excellence, it actually refers to the universal man.